I moved into my aunt's old house when I was 19, and the first night, something whispering my name woke me up. I say whispering because it wasn't the kind of noise that has a shape you can point at. It was the kind of sound that sits behind your teeth and makes your tongue heavy. My name is Claire, and I was living there while finishing college, splitting rent with Mark, who worked nights at the hospital, and with Jenna, who studied for her bar exams. It was the end of winter. The heater rattled like an old cough, the street lamp threw a thin orange rectangle across the hallway, and the smell of mothballs and old coffee hung in the living room. I had moved in to save money and to look after the place while my aunt recovered from surgery. The first night, I woke because the floorboard outside my door squeaked, and then there was that whisper. I sat up, heart thudding so loud it sounded like someone knocking on the wall. "Claire," the voice said softly. I thought it was Mark messing with me at first, so I kept my eyes closed. Then a sleeve brushed the back of my neck, and I nearly screamed. "Don't be a jerk," I hissed, shoving the blanket back. Mark laughed in the doorway, flashlight in hand, but he was in his scrubs and said he had been at work all night. He said the hospital called him in for an emergency, and he had been there until dawn. Jenna swore later she had seen footprints in the dust on the back porch, small enough to be a child. The police took a report. Officer Ramirez wrote everything down and said they would increase patrols. That was only the beginning, and you will hear things in these next stories that make you lock your doors twice. Why would someone crawl into a house at 2 in the morning and whisper a name like a key? The second story I heard was told to me by Luis, who lives 3 blocks over, and whose dog began howling at the same hour every night. Luis is a painter, tall but quiet, with quiet hands that smell of turpentine. He told me that one summer night, he returned from a gallery showing at midnight and found his mailbox open and his sketchbook moved to the porch. The porch smelled like wet paint and rain, even though the forecast had been clear. He called his neighbor Tom, who came over in bare feet, flashlight shaking. Conversation went like this. "Did you leave it out?" Tom asked, squinting at the book. "No," Luis said. "I keep it inside my studio." Tom crouched, ran a finger along the edge, and said, "There are prints here, like someone put their palm and lifted." Luis felt the air, like the way you do just before thunder, a weight behind the skin. He called 911. Officer Green arrived and dusted the page for prints, then asked who else had keys. "Maria has a spare," Tom said. "She looks after plants when you travel." Maria swore she hadn't been there. The prints came back partial and unmatched. The sense of being watched grew in Luis, the hum at the back of his skull, and the way the dog would not come inside. He installed new locks, but the feeling did not leave. I want you to pause with me because the next story is the one that made every neighbor change their habits. This is Jenna again. She worked as a legal clerk, and she told me about a man who tried to hand her a letter under the door. It was late, the hallway smelled of bleach from the cleaners, the elevator dinged and left a stale metallic echo. Jenna opened the door, and there he was, a man in a cheap suit, small suitcase, no badge. He held a yellow envelope and said, "This is for the building manager." She asked his name. He looked at her like she had asked him to perform a trick. "I'm just delivering," he said. Jenna pushed him back and slammed the door. He left and then came back at dawn when she was leaving for work. "You opened it," he said, softly through the mail slot. "No, I did not," she answered. "You will," he said. She called Mark, and he came over, and they stood together, voices low, checking the pee-hole. The envelope never arrived again, but the building installed a camera, and the footage showed a thin figure lingering under the lamp, watching the stairwell like someone studying a map. We asked why someone would do that. The answer was not clear, but the fear was. Now, before we go on, I want to ask you something, and I want to hear from you in the comments. The stories so far may feel like isolated incidents, but they share a quiet danger the people who lived them describe as a presence that learns routines. If you have ever experienced something similar, start your comment with "I'm calling it in" and tell us what happened in one sentence. Tell us where you were and what time it was. Do not include personal information you are not comfortable sharing. Your words can help others recognize patterns and stay safe. We read every comment, and sometimes we reach out to the authors to verify details or to help them tell their full story. Your experience matters, and by sharing, you help a community that is trying to understand these moments. Now on to the next account that almost cost someone their life. Story 4 comes from Daniel, an overnight stalker at a grocery store on Route 9, a place lit by buzzing fluorescents and the constant beep of scanners. One night at 3 in the morning, he heard someone humming a song on the PA system that no one had programmed. The air smelled of bleach and cold coffee. The milk case was sweating, and somewhere in aisle 7, a tumble of cans rolled as if pushed. Daniel called the manager, and the manager, named Sarah, came to check the back storage. They exchanged a quick conversation. "You hear that?" Daniel asked. "It is the ventilation," Sarah said. "The tune was not on any playlist," Daniel insisted. They walked together toward the sound, shoes squeaking on linoleum. "Stop," Sarah said, as something moved behind a stack of empty cardboard, the shadow of a person melting away. The security system showed a figure ducking between pallets and then slipping out the receiving door. The police processed the scene, taking statements and logging evidence. The technicians explained the camera footage was grainy because of a technical setting, and that chain of custody would be established before any forensic lab work. They dusted for fingerprints, sealed the parcel area, and cataloged a scrap of fabric found near the pallet bay using standard procedure that included tagging, photographing, and placing items into evidence bags, which were then logged into an evidence inventory. The reading of that report later would be short and technical, but that night the store workers felt watched. The fifth story is about a country road. My neighbor Maria told me about a friend of hers, Pete, who was driving home from a late shift delivering newspapers. It was foggy, the old dash clock glowed amber, the radio hummed a talk show about baseball, and his hands on the wheel felt numb. He rounded a bend and saw a person standing in the middle of the road, a silhouette with arms out like someone pleading. He slammed the brakes. The air smelled of wet straw and exhaust. He rolled the window down. "Are you okay?" he called. The person raised a hand and then reached toward the car in a movement that was too quick. Pete swerved into the ditch to avoid hitting them. When he backed up, there was no one there, and the ground on the roadside had single, shallow footprints that ended abruptly. He called his sister Nancy. "Get me a flashlight," he said. Nancy drove out in a robe and a sweater, smelling of soap and the bakery that made her shift cakes. They found a scarf caught in the fence and a small tarnished coin. The police came and said it could be a prank, or worse, a tactic to cause an accident and then take valuables from a stopped car. That idea made Pete sleep with the lights on for weeks. The sixth tale belongs to Tom, who once opened his basement door in the middle of the night to find the ladder shifted and the trap door ajar. The house smelled like damp earth and old bread, and the sound of the fridge was louder than it should be. He told his wife Sarah, and she held his hand, nails biting into the skin. "Lock it," she whispered. "Don't go down there alone," she said. Tom said he had the distinct impression of eyes watching from below. He went anyway, with a flashlight. Their exchange was tight, a rope between them. "I'm going down," Tom said. "Promise me you will call someone," Sarah replied. "I will," he said, the beam of light cutting across the concrete steps. He climbed down, and the beam hit a small toy car, a child's shoe, and mud tracks that finished at the central support column. There were distinct marks like fingers dragging along wood. They called the police, who brought a dog that would not descend more than the first 2 steps and sat at the top whimpering. The seventh account is a stalking story that begins as an ordinary Friday. Sarah, a schoolteacher, began receiving notes tucked under her door after parent-teacher nights. The notes said things like, "I watched you with your class," and "You smile the way I like." She told a friend, Maria, who urged her to change her route home and to walk with colleagues. Dialogue between Sarah and her friend expanded over weeks. "Did you tell the principal?" Maria asked. "I did," Sarah said. "He said he would keep an eye out," Maria replied. "I am scared," Sarah said. "We will document everything," Maria said. "Bring me the notes," Sarah agreed. They started leaving copies with a trusted coworker named Daniel and with Officer Ramirez, who advised them on safety steps, recommended motion lights, and offered to escort Sarah to her car when possible. The presence did not stop, but it escalated to calls at night that went silent. The moment of tension came when Sarah found a small doll hanging from the rearview mirror of her car, its face turned down. The doll smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. Officer Ramirez took photos and told her to bring the doll to the station, which they did. The investigations created a folder that later would show multiple phone records and a suspect description, but no arrest the first month. The eighth story is the one that involved a sound that no one could explain. It was reported by a group of 5 fishermen who were anchored off a river bend at 2 in the morning. They heard a low thrumming under the water, like a giant engine idling, but no boats were nearby. The moon was thin, the air tasted like salt and algae, and their skin prickled with cold. "Do you hear that?" said Mark, who had been drinking coffee and smoking a cigarette. "It sounds like a whale, but there are none this far upriver," said Louise, who had been fishing since he was 10. The sound moved with them, as if following the hull, and once, as if to taunt, a splash hit the side of the boat with no visible cause. They all agreed not to tell anyone at first because it felt ridiculous, but one of them recorded a clip on his phone that later, when played in the light of day, made every hair stand up on my arms. The 9th story is the most personal and the hardest to tell. It's from me. One autumn evening, when the leaves were just starting to crisp and the air smelled like metallic change, I opened my laptop and found a photograph on my desktop that I did not place there. The image was of my living room from the vantage point of the hallway, the curtains drawn, the television off, and in the center of the frame, the date scribbled in red pen on a piece of paper. I froze, the room air going cold in my throat. I called Mark, and he came over immediately, keys jangling, breath fogging in the doorway. We talked in the clipped way people do when adrenaline sits on the chest. "Did you open my laptop?" I asked. "No," he said. "It has to be Jenna," he suggested. "She would never," Jenna protested when we knocked and she opened the door. "I don't know how to use your computer," she said, hands trembling. We looked at the photo together and realized the timestamp was wrong, the camera date set to a year earlier. Officer Green said the image could be metadata tampering and suggested a forensic IT check. The technician, Dr. Hall, explained in calm technical speech that they would examine logs, look for remote access signs, review router logs, and check for unauthorized devices on the network. The explanation seemed clinical, but the feeling in my chest remained raw. It was a slow burn of paranoia, the sense that privacy had been breached in the smallest and most intimate way. 1 month later, things had changed. I had moved the laptops into a locked cabinet and purchased a small camera to watch the hallway. Mark had changed shifts so he could be home more often. Jenna installed a new lock with a keypad, and Maria offered to pick up packages. Officer Ramirez followed up on the ports and filed a supplemental report about the photograph. Lewis had his dog checked by a veterinarian who confirmed nothing physical was wrong. The fisherman told a local reporter, and the clip went viral in the region, which brought more attention and more strangers at the docks asking questions. The neighborhood began to adopt simple routines like leaving lights on, sharing walks, and syncing schedules. There was a sense of communal guarding that felt both protective and invasive. 3 months later, the tone had shifted into an uneasy normal. The police had a lead in the case of the photo when digital analysis revealed an IP address pinged from a public Wi-Fi near the train station on the night the image was taken. They interviewed a man named Daniel who matched the grainy outline from a security camera, but he had an alibi and no direct evidence connected him. The grocery store workers found a cigarette butt near the receiving doors, and DNA returned an inconclusive match that still left more questions than answers. Sarah, the teacher, had taken a leave of absence for a few weeks, then returned with a support plan and a counselor who helped document the harassment in a way that made further legal action possible. The fishermen refused to go out at night for a while, but money needs make routines return. The living process became a ledger of small victories and daily caution. 6 months on, some things had resolved and others had not. The man who whispered my name was never found, but Officer Green noted an uptick in similar reports across neighboring precincts, and the department launched an awareness campaign for late-night workers and single residents that included safety audits and free door chains. Mark took a promotion that kept him home more often, though he still had night shifts now and then. The fisherman finally identified a machinery source upriver after a contractor admitted to running a generator near a shallow channel that created strange acoustics on certain nights. The stalker case for Sarah reached a point where a restraining order was issued against a suspect with ties to the neighborhood, but not all suspected actions could be tied conclusively, and some evidence remained circumstantial. We all learn to carry our keys in our fists, to take photos of strangers who linger near doorways, to call when we feel watched, and to name fears out loud so they do not grow in the dark. I want to close by saying that these 10 accounts are not meant to terrify for the sake of shock, but to put a voice to the small violations that change how we move through the world. These incidents rearrange routines. They teach us to check the locks twice, to ask who else has keys, to document and to reach out to neighbors like Maria, to coworkers like Tom, to officers like Ramirez and Green, and to professionals like Dr. Hall when needed. If you feel unsettled after listening, that is a reasonable response. If you have a story like this, start your comment with "I'm calling it in" and tell us one line about what happened and when so others can learn. If you want more of these compilations, subscribe for verified eyewitness accounts and practical safety steps we gather with local authorities and experts. People shared groceries, candles, keys, and courage in our neighborhood after these events, and that is the kind of response that matters. Be alert, be kind to your neighbors, and remember that silence lets some dangers grow. If you liked this collection, subscribe and share, and tell us which story shook you the most. The house stands, the streetlights turn on, but none of us sleep like we used to.